This is the second video in my Real Kitchen remodel miniature production. Today's topic, a window and sliding patio door.
In a world, a tiny, miniature world that exists only in her imagination.
Hi y'all, I'm Tippy Cal, MiniMakerSal's imaginary friend and video narrator. Let's get right to it. In this section, Sal made the window that goes above the kitchen sink and looks over the backyard. The first step in making the window was to trace the opening on a piece of paper. Sal cut that out and made sure it fit in the window. She then cut a squared off chipboard and used it as a window template and checked that it fit. Using this nifty General Tool protractor, Sal cut the 45-degree angles into the balsa strips. Conveniently, the arm just happens to sit 1/16 of an inch above the surface, the same height as her balsa would. However, she did have to modify this tool a bit as the arm just didn't tighten down so well. She replaced the paper-thin inner plastic washer with one slightly thicker and replaced the nut with a wing nut to make for easier turning. That extra $1.80 was well worth it. Sal used the first stick she cut as a guide to cut out the rest of them, then checked to make sure they squared up. When she found a stick that was too long, using her X-Acto knife, she cut a teeny angled slice off the end.
Tippy tip.
For putting a thin line of glue on a piece of wood, Sal uses these 3.5-inch tall needle nose applicators. Here, she's filling one with the wood glue. The next step was to glue together the pieces of each frame. Sal then painted the sides of the frame that would be inside next to the plexiglass. Some thumbtacks were poked into the inside of the frames, then they were turned upside down so the edges and outside could be painted. Using a utility knife, Sal scored then broke off the plexiglass on the edge of her desk. Next, an unsuccessful attempt to fit the window into its space. As these things go, much filing down of the inside of the window was needed. And of course, that took much longer to file and fit and so on. On the outside of the south wall, Sal filled in the excess space with a Mod Podge and spackle mix. She wiped down the excess in preparation for sanding and painting after that dried. She then put some waxed paper and weights on top to hold the frame in place while it dried. With a bit of paint on one side of the blade, Sal painted what needed to be touched up. She either slid the blade in or put a drop of paint on the surface, then pushed it into the crevice. She felt she could touch up the window frame by hand, so she used a very flat chisel paint brush that's about 3/16 of an inch wide. And there, all done except for the window washing. Now, onto the construction of the sliding patio door. Before starting on the sliding door, Sal screwed a stick to the bottom of the wall to make sure all would fit right in the allotted space. Sal's first step in making the sliding door was to make a frame for the two doors. Cutting sticks 5/8 of an inch wide, the same as the board, had to be done first. Of course, cutting slowly is necessary to get a clean cut without injuring her fingers. Cross-cutting the 5/8 inch sticks to the needed lengths was done along the edge of this protractor set at 90 degrees. Sal hasn't quite figured out how to hold the wood and protractor firmly, so she ended up cutting without the tool in the scored channel. Then it was time to cross-cut the horizontal sticks, sand as needed, and make sure they fit into the door opening. She glued the top stick in with wood glue, then clamped it in place while it dried. When Sal placed and glued the side frames in, she used a couple sticks to brace those so they'd stick closely to the sides. She then added 2 more sticks to the base, glued and clamped them into place. Time to make the 2 doors for the sliding door. Sal pulled out her mini miter box, her razor saw, and a bundle of sticks taped together to cut at once. She lined up the bundle of 1/16 by 1/4 inch balsa wood sticks and then cut them to the needed length. Sal cut out the whole door size as a template, then glued the wood pieces together. You can tell she had to add a couple pieces to the template to adjust the size, as her first cut was just too big. She then coated both sides of the 4 door frames with gesso. After the gesso dried, she painted both sides in black. By the way, the 4 frames are to make 2 front and back frames on each door. Sal painted the patio door main frame in black. This shows how she put glue on the inside of one frame, then added the plexiglass. She then glued the other frame to this, creating a door sandwich. She filled in the edges of the doors with the Mod Podge and black paint mix. Next, Sal glued a support into the bottom of the opening so the static door could be placed on it. To make sure that support dried tightly, she used a bunch of sticks to press that down. After that dried, Sal painted it, then glued the static door in place. On the back outside of the door, Sal placed and glued in top, bottom, and side supports for the static door. As you may suspect, Sal had to jury-rig a lot in this sliding door space. One reason is that the hole was 1/16 of an inch taller on one side than the other. The bigger reason is that she's a novice, and besides wanting to have this kitchen for figuring out how to remodel the real one, this is good practice for her next mini-making project, which she's planning on as a 5-room dollhouse. More speeded up stick painting. Gluing and placing a 1/4 inch support on the back. And yet, more painting. The next thing was to make a handle for the sliding door panel. Sal decided to try a spot of glue on a straight pen, then sticking that in some styrofoam to hold the handle up while she painted the front side. She then glued that and clamped it in place to dry. Next, Sal glued a support for the door channel in the front, then clamped it down. Next, she measured a stick to cut a slice for support behind the sliding door, which she then fit into place. Then, of course, painted. Sal had this silver wire in her stash of crap. She cut off a piece, folded it around, and glued it to the door handle to make that easier to see. Next, she put together the front whole door frame. She painted and glued that frame in place. Then she noticed the handle was on the wrong side of the sliding door. The glue hadn't yet dried, so she took the frame off, turned the door 180, and reattached the frame. Finally, a functioning sliding door. It doesn't glide smoothly, but it serves its purpose. Curtain time. Sal found part of this design online, modified the colors in Photoshop to what she wanted. It took a while for her to get the image perfectly straight. Then she copied the patterns several times and lined them all up. Thankfully, making seamless tiled images is something she often did in her web graphic design days, so she knew how to do this. Sal printed the curtain pattern to a t-shirt transfer paper on her inkjet printer. But the first time ended in this disaster.
Tippy tip.
Definitely don't iron the transfer on your ironing board directly, and don't think a piece of cardboard or foam board is going to work. Use a smooth, hard piece of wood to iron on, and be sure to use a lot of pressure. Heat, pressure, and a solid ironing surface are crucial to the success of the transfer. Since Sal had this scrap piece of her transfer on the thin muslin fabric, an experiment was in order. This turned out to be a success, though she poured too much Mod Podge on it first. She brushed the coating of Mod Podge on, hoping that the colors would not run, and they didn't. She used a hairdryer to speed up the drying process. If you want your fabric to flow, however, the Mod Podge will stiffen it too much. If you want to iron your transfer, do not do so directly, And do not use plain paper. Parchment paper will allow you to iron without ruining the transfer. Backing up just a little bit, this is how to iron the transfer onto your fabric. You should use a very hot iron and lots of pressure, and make sure you press 60 seconds on each piece of the transfer. Peeling the transfer paper backing from the fabric, Sal then ironed the front and back using some parchment paper to flatten it all out. Because Sal planned to make pleated curtains, she coated the transfer with Mod Podge. Since she used such thin fabric, this caused the curtain to have a paper-like quality, though it will not easily tear. Sal folded the top edge down about a 1/4 inch, glued it with Mod Podge, and burnished it down to bind it securely. Because she didn't want to sew the curtains, she coated the edges with Mod Podge to prevent them from fraying. She then folded pleats into the curtain. To firm up the pleats, she clamped them for about 15 minutes. Sal wanted the side edges of the curtain to face the wall, so she had to trim one side. She Mod Podged that newly cut edge. The curtain was too long, so Sal cut the extra off and Mod Podged the new edge. Sal needed to make some hardware to hold up the curtain rod. She had this pair of balsa wood seahorses in her stash of crap, so she cut off the tails and also cut 2 diamond-shaped pieces of balsa wood to mount the tails on. She glued together the curtain hardware. This photo shows that with the rod, then the rod painted copper, to which she added some black with a dry brush to give it a bronze look. Next, she attached some tiny hoops on the underside of the curtain. She also Mod Podged the threads to make them more secure, just as you might do when you have to sew a button on your shirt. This shows the hoops on the back of the curtain. Sal glued the finials to the ends of the rods. Sal had to file a bit out of the brick wall to mount one of the curtain hoops to use as a curtain tie-back. She then glued the hoop to the wall. After that dried, she painted it in the wall's adobe color. The curtain is tied back with a thin piece of black leather. This shows a drawing Sal did on her computer of the mini-split heating and cooling unit, then cut out, folded, and taped it all together, then glued it into place on the olive brick wall. The walls are pretty much done, so Sal mounted them onto the base. And the room is ready for cabinets, appliances, and other furnishings. So, on to the next step. But before she comes back to the Real Kitchen Remodel Mini, Sal is going to try her hand at making this brown-haired 5.5-inch doll to look like Tippy. Then she's going to make her first cabinet, a corner pantry with Lazy Susan shelves. The drawing on the right shows how the round shelf will sit on top of each of the 5-sided shelf. Tippy told you what I'll be doing in my next 2 videos, so thank you for watching this. I hope it gave you an idea or two and taught you a bit. Please like and subscribe and be sure to leave me a comment. See you next time.